Assemblymember Lavine, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it as we are on the precipice of a new legislative session, but also the day before you come back, was January 6th, 5 years since the attack at the Capitol. Now you're proposing legislation along with the Senate sponsor Liu regarding this in schools and the education of it. Can you speak to a little bit to what that's all about?
Certainly. When I introduced this bill a year ago on January the 30th, I intended for this to be really simply symbolic. Uh, um, I did fear, however, that President Trump could, in the ensuing years of his second term, institute policies that would whitewash the events of January the 6th. Now, on January the 7th of 2021, I was in a hospital in New York City having a procedure, nothing life-threatening at all, but I was debilitated yeah, for the entirety of the 7th and most of the 8th. And I realized how helpless I felt. And that was the first time in my life I'd ever been debilitated, not able to really move without assistance. Thank goodness everything worked out. But it gave me a lot of hours to reflect on the events that I had seen on January the 6th and how disgusted I was, as was and is every American of good faith, at what occurred on that date. Now, we've seen in the following year that President Trump is doing his very best, with the help of many of his assistants, to make sure that history now conforms to his particular ideation of what American history should be. The truth remains the truth. You can't change the truth. But one of the dangers is that in societies, cultures that are authoritarian, there is almost always an attempt to renovate or change or remodel the truth in order to make the truth more palatable and supportive of the authoritarian regimes. This is the United States of America. We are not going to let that happen. And we have seen over the course of the last year that many Americans who really never thought of themselves as being political at heart, have taken to the streets and are extraordinarily dissatisfied. And the statistics, the polling shows the overwhelming majority of Americans are not only just dissatisfied, they are disgusted by what Trump is doing. So this is our attempt now to make sure in New York State that the events of January the 6th will be instructed in our public education system.
When you mentioned what the president is doing to sort of change the narrative around this day, are you speaking to the pardons that were, of course, the 1,000 plus that were initial? And there have been some since. I don't think they've been as a headline in the news, but there have been more pardons since that initial batch of them. Is it that, or is it also just rhetoric that's coming out right now?
It is everything. As far as the pardons go, many of us suspected early on in Trump's regime that he was going to do what he said he would do, which was to pardon all of these people. These are the same people who wanted to hang Mike Pence. And in fact, these are the same people who terrorized the members of Congress who were in the Capitol on that day. And let's not forget, police officers were brutalized. They were brutalized, and some died. So it amazes me that my colleagues in the House of Representatives and many in the Senate who feared for their lives and ran for their lives, literally ran for their lives on January the 6th, are now supporting President Trump's jihad, his jihad to pardon and to change history of what occurred on January the 6th.
Of course,
He's
you do
probably
have
not going to be too
those.
happy I used the word jihad.
You do have those on the other side that would say it's not nearly what it's been made out to be. As you mentioned, the president himself saying this, saying it was just a disorderly group of people that were, out there protesting. What is your response to that argument that this doesn't rise to that level?
Interestingly and ironically enough, many of the people who say that it really wasn't what we saw on television on that day. Were 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 members of the Congress who were scared to death on that day. I guess, as used to be said, politics makes strange bedfellows, and that's for sure. But anyone who saw what happened knows what happened. And my suspicion is this, that those of us who condemn what occurred on that day saw reality. And those who condone what happened on that day, and those who condone and are happy about the pardons, they know how evil the actions of that day were, but they like what happened on that day. That's dangerous. This is a very dangerous cohort we have in our culture today. And if we do not tell our children the truth, if we don't teach our children the truth, this is only going to get worse. And it will get worse before it gets better. But as American citizens of good faith, we have a solemn responsibility. We have more than a solemn responsibility. We have a solemn obligation to teach our children the truth, to make sure that we, in fact, do become a more perfect union. We cannot become a more perfect union, which is what the founders wanted, if we have a foundation that exists on a tissue of lies.
Do you have a specific target as to what you would hope would be taught when it comes to these events of that day, or just broadly what happened? Because I know I think I looked in the legislation. It says the events of that day and what's happened and what's precipitated after the fact. Is there anything specific about it that you would hope that we would be a part of this that could be written in?
That will be up to the Board of Regents in New York State. Thank goodness. Members of the legislature do not define what curriculum is. We can suggest and we can actually incorporate in the law requirements that certain areas of history, certain subject matters be taught. And we do. The Holocaust, slavery, the Irish potato famine. These are all historic occurrences that played a role in the development of New York State and the development of the United States of America. But we are not about to prescribe the actual curriculum. I will leave that to my colleagues in Florida and Texas, who seem to do a wonderful job of corrupting public education. That's why I wanted to make sure that my children went to school in New York State. And I am also very pleased that some of my grandchildren go to school in New York State. Others go to school in California, where there's at least an attempt to teach the truth.
You know, I was looking at the social studies learning standards for the Department of Education, and they do provide. They told me today that they don't require the DOE or endorse or advise, but they do have in these learning standards they have, I don't want to call them examples of what could be covered, and undertake case studies of basic civil and human rights. And they do provide examples in that, and it looks like in the legislation you do want specifically this to be included in those examples. Is that a good way to characterize
That
one
is
of the
a
shifts you
that
wanted
is
there?
a much more eloquent way to characterize it than I could have done. And let's also remember that another subject is to be taught pursuant to our education law, and that's the Holocaust.
That goes along with that.
Yes.
Right. That goes along within those standards. And then after that, like you said, the Board of Regents would decide from there. And then down to the DOE also said the local level plays a part in that as well, whether or not they go forward with it. How does it work? I was curious how this would work at the end of the day.
Well, this would be a collaborative effort between our Board of Regents and the State Education Department and our local boards of education as well. And in New York State, we have managed to do a pretty good job of teaching our students over the years. And we must remain committed to that high quality of excellence in education. And that means teaching our children the truth, teaching them not only about the truth of history, but teaching them how to be critical thinkers as well. I'm very proud of what we do in the state of New York when it comes to that effort.
And I find it interesting. This is more of a, I mean, even remember when I went to school, it was tough for the history books to keep up with current events. I guess, would you like to see more of that? I mean, this is within the last 5 years. I remember I don't want to date myself, but I was in high school towards the end of the mid 2000s. So they were just starting to teach about 9/11 at that point.
Yes.
I guess, would you like to see, I guess, a little bit more of the proactivity when it comes to the history classes, and trying to keep up? Because I know it's difficult because those books have to change out. And I remember the 9/11 section was very small because it's so recent, you know?
We are moving finally in the right direction. For the last almost 30 years, if not, I think more than 30 years, our children in our schools have been taught how to take tests. That has robbed and stolen from our teachers the ability to instruct our kids on how to be critical thinkers. We need critical thinkers. We don't need kids who know mechanically, as a matter of rote, how to do well on tests. That has proven to be an impossible task. And we have, in my opinion, made education a more miserable experience for the last couple of generations, and maybe 3 generations now, of our kids. And that is not good. Social studies teachers have told me that they are left with all of about 40 to 45 minutes to instruct on the entirety of the Second World War, which was the most critical historic event of the previous century. So we need to make sure that our kids learn facts, truth, and learn to be critical thinkers so they can evaluate facts and truth and make sure that whatever policies they are going to implement as they become adults are based on reality and not on weird or bizarre ideologies. That's a recipe for disaster. This is something that we have to do.
It's interesting because we're in a day and age where there's a lot of sources of information, whether that's verified or not, right? And I think that hopefully the kids in the school would be getting the truth and the accurate information that's out there.
We have to rely on our education system to be able to deliver that sort of education to our children. Because
Assemblymember Lavine.
otherwise, they can go on, anyone who wants can go online and, people can have the craziest ideologies and they can find some way to substantiate in their own minds or validate these goofy ideologies. We can't have that. We have it, but we may have to make sure that our children are protected and armored in a way that they will not fall prey to that sort of bizarre conduct.